The Thompson family summer gathering wasn't your typical laid-back barbecue. It was less about catching up over lemonade and more about a subtle annual showcase of who had climbed highest, built the most impressive life, acquired the shinest toys, held at my Aunt Patricia's sprawling, impeccably landscaped estate just outside the city. The air practically shimmered with unspoken competition beneath the polite smiles and clinking glasses. I stood near the edge of the patio, holding a sparkling water, trying to blend into the background noise of laughter and self-congratulatory anecdotes. Being here always felt like being under a microscope, but today, after the last few months, the magnification felt intense. My name is Scarlett Thompson. Until recently, I was a senior software architect at Constellation Tech, a company that liked to market itself as an innovation hub but, in my experience, was more focused on chasing trends and acquiring smaller companies for their potential, rather than fostering true, groundbreaking development internally. Today, I was unemployed. Laid off. A casualty of recent restructuring, they'd called it. At 42, the label felt less like a temporary setback and more like a brand burned onto my forehead. The family grapevine, faster than any fiber optic cable, had already delivered the news to every corner of the gathering. Across the manicured lawn, under a large awning, my cousins held court. Brenda, in a crisp white pantsuit despite the heat, was deep in conversation with a group of uncles and aunts, her voice sharp and confident as she discussed navigating complex corporate mergers. Brenda had gone the traditional route, top law school, straight into corporate law, now a partner at a prestigious firm. To her, success was measured in billable hours, corner offices, and strategically chosen power suits. Beside her, Mark, wearing a designer polo shirt and an expensive watch, was gesturing animatedly, holding forth on leveraging synergies and disrupting legacy markets in the tech sales world. Mark had a knack for talking the talk, rising quickly in management despite, in my opinion, having a rather shaky grasp of the actual technology he pitched. They were the golden children of the family, the ones whose achievements were always highlighted in the annual holiday letter. Brenda spotted me and offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Scarlett, there you are. Come join us. We were just discussing career resilience in volatile markets." Mark chimed in, his voice a little too loud, ensuring everyone nearby could hear. "Yes, Scarlett, tough break about Constellation. Heard they did some significant culling. Must be rough." He shook his head, a look of exaggerated sympathy on his face that was pure condescension. "Guess the architect roles weren't quite as secure as they seemed, huh?" A wave of familiar frustration washed over me. They saw my job, my passion, as just a role, something ephemeral and easily dismissed. They couldn't comprehend the years of deep work, the complex problem-solving, the sheer building that went into my career. To them, I hadn't climbed the right ladder. "It was unexpected," I replied, keeping my voice even. Brenda tilted her head slightly, her lawyer's gaze assessing. "Any prospects lined up? You signed your severance agreement, I assume?" And reviewed the non-compete clause thoroughly. She launched into a brief, unsolicited lecture on the importance of legal counsel in these situations, peppered with jargon. It wasn't helpful. It was just another way of highlighting my perceived vulnerability and her expertise. "Everything was handled," I assured her, taking a slow sip of my water. My mind, however, was miles away, replaying a different conversation. A meeting with Mr. Harrison, the smooth-talking, technically illiterate CTO at Constellation Tech, 18 months ago. I had pitched Aegis to him, my side project, my passion. A revolutionary, self-healing, quantum-resistant secure communication platform I'd been building on my own time for years. He listened patiently, nodded, then dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Interesting hobby project, Scarlett," he'd said, leaning back in his chair. "But far too complex, too niche, not scalable for our immediate market needs. Focus on the core products, all right? A hobby." He'd called my life's work a hobby. Mark laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Hobby projects, huh? See, that's what I mean. You techies get so caught up in the weeds. You gotta look at the business side. The market, the sales pipeline, the funding rounds. That's where the real value is created." He thumped his chest lightly. "That's why guys like me climb the ladder." I managed a tight smile. "Someone has to build the ladder, Mark. Aunt Carol, sitting quietly under a nearby umbrella, offered me a small, genuinely kind smile. She didn't understand code, but she understood dedication. She'd always encouraged my tinkering, as she called it, ever since I was a kid taking apart old computers. Her quiet support meant more than she knew right then. Mark was about to launch into another anecdote about a deal he'd closed, but I felt a tremor of anticipation. The time was approaching. The massive multi-billion-dollar deployment of the system Constellation Tech had sold to a major government agency. The system Harrison had crammed Aegis into, claiming it as his own, was scheduled to go live across their network in minutes. And I knew exactly what would happen when Aegis, under unauthorized command, fully activated. I discreetly checked my phone. 2:57 p.m. Right on time. My heart rate picked up slightly, a controlled thrum of adrenaline. Years of work, months of careful planning, culminating in a single, unavoidable moment. Brenda was now giving Mark advice on negotiating equity in his next venture. They were so absorbed in their world of perceived success, completely oblivious to the tectonic shift about to occur beneath their feet. The irony was almost overwhelming. They mocked my insecure technical job, while their world was built on a foundation of lies Harrison had stolen from me. "It's a brutal industry," Mark was saying, shaking his head performatively. "You gotta be agile, ruthless. Can't get sentimental about code." Ruthless, I thought, is one word for it. Fraud was another. Stupid was perhaps the most accurate in Harrison's case. He thought he could just take my work, slap a new name on it, and sell it for a fortune. He thought firing the hobby project lady would erase my existence from Aegis. He couldn't have been more wrong. Anyway, Brenda concluded her financial advice, turning her attention back to me with that assessing look. "What are your plans, Scarlett? Are you pivoting? Perhaps something less specialized?" Mark leaned in, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, Scarlett, maybe something in sales? You're good with people, right? I could probably get you an intro at my place, start you at the bottom. Work your way up." The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Guess programming wasn't your thing after all, huh?" His words hung in the air. Several nearby conversations lulled, people subtly turning to gauge my reaction. The familiar humiliation started to prickle, but beneath it, a steel rod of certainty held me upright. Programming wasn't my thing. It was everything. And they were about to find out exactly what my thing was truly capable of. I looked at my watch one last time. 2:59 p.m. Almost time. "Actually," I said, raising my voice slightly calmly, just enough to draw their full attention. I met Mark's smug gaze, then Brenda's calculating one. "Why don't we all take out our phones? I think the next few minutes are going to be quite interesting." Mark snorted, recovering his arrogance quickly. "What, did you finally build that killer calculator app?" A few people chuckled nervously. Aunt Carol looked at me, a flicker of concern in her eyes. I offered them a small, genuine smile this time. "Something like that," I said. "Something foundational." And then, precisely as the digital clock on my phone screen rolled over to 3 p.m., the world changed. The first vibration was mine. Then Brenda's phone buzzed loudly from her pocket. Mark's device, sitting on the table next to him, lit up and began vibrating. Within seconds, the quiet chatter of the garden party was overtaken by a cascade of notification sounds. Phones across the lawn were buzzing, chiming, lighting up. People furrowed their brows, checking their screens, expecting routine emails or social media alerts. Instead, their faces began to change. Brenda's eyes widened as she scrolled, her perfectly manicured fingers pausing mid-scroll. Mark's smug grin froze, then slackened into confusion. A collective hush fell over the area as more people saw the headlines. What is this?" someone near Brenda stammered. The headlines were stark, hitting multiple news feeds simultaneously. Breaking: Constellation Tech stock plummeting following major client contract suspension. Urgent security concerns force government agency to halt multi-billion-dollar software rollout. Authentication protocol alert. Questions surround origin of key technology in Constellation Tech platform. Constellation Tech CTO, Mr. Harrison, unavailable for comment amid unfolding tech scandal. Brenda looked up from her phone, her face pale. Constellation, that's your old company, Scarlett. Her voice was barely a whisper, the confidence of moments before completely gone. Mark was frantically swiping through articles, his eyes wide. Aegis? What the hell is Aegis? Creator's mark? This says the core tech might be stolen. I took another slow sip of my water, the coolness a pleasant contrast to the sudden heat of the moment. I said, my voice calm, measured, cutting through the rising panic. Yes, Aegis is indeed my old company. And yes, it appears there are some questions about the origin of the core technology in that platform they just tried to deploy. I lowered my glass. Now is the time. You see, I continued, addressing Brenda and Mark directly, but loud enough for the stunned audience around us to hear. When I was at Constellation, I built a secure communication platform on my own time. My hobby project, as some called it internally. A project Mr. Harrison, the CTO, reviewed and dismissed as not commercially viable. I let that sink in for a moment. What Mr. Harrison didn't know, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that my hobby was revolutionary. And I built it with a very specific feature. I paused, looking from Brenda's horrified face to Mark's utterly bewildered one. Deep inside Aegis's architecture, I embedded what I called the creator's mark, an immutable authentication protocol. It's designed so that when Aegis is fully deployed and activated without the original creator's verified credentials, essentially, when someone tries to use or modify it without my explicit authorization, it triggers a public record. More phones buzzed with updated headlines. Investigation launched. Government agency cites potential fraud in Constellation tech deal. Silicon Valley shaken. Source code authorship questioned in massive tech scandal. Project Aegis. The hidden story behind Constellation Tech's collapsing contract. This creator's mark, I explained, my voice steady, doesn't just flash my name. It systematically authenticates every line of code, tracing its developmental history, including who originally wrote it and when. And crucially, upon unauthorized, large-scale activation like the one scheduled for 3 p.m. today, it automatically broadcasts that verified origin to key oversight systems, the client itself, and as you can see, I gestured to the phones lighting up, relevant news networks. Brenda stumbled back slightly, bumping into a table. You planned this? She stammered, her lawyer's brain struggling to process the layers of intent and consequence. But you were fired. They owned your work. That's where Mr. Harrison was mistaken, I said, a genuinely sharp edge entering my voice for the first time. I built Aegis independently, on my own time, using my own equipment. My engagement with Constellation Tech regarding Aegis was limited to a technical review, which I documented meticulously, including their formal dismissal of it as a company project. I also ensured that any testing I did on their systems had explicit written permission that specifically maintained my intellectual property rights. I pulled out my phone, not to show a screen, but to make a point. And while Mr. Harrison was busy dismissing my hobby and later, I presume, figuring out how to steal it, I was busy securing robust patents covering Aegis's core innovations. 17 of them, to be exact. Brenda's eyes widened even further. A partner at a law firm would understand the weight of 17 patents on a core technology. But why wait, she whispered. Why let them fire you? Why let him sell it? Because sometimes, I said, looking at them, at the circle of stunned faces, justice needs an audience. Harrison stealing my work and selling it for $1 billion contract, then firing me and thinking he was safe? That was step one in my plan. By letting him deploy it, he didn't just steal my code. He committed massive fraud using stolen technology on a public, verifiable stage. He created the undeniable proof himself. My phone buzzed again. An incoming call. The number was restricted, but I knew who it was. Mr. Harrison. His perfectly constructed world was crumbling around him, broadcast globally, and he was calling the hobby project lady in a panic. I let it ring twice, then silenced it, the simple action speaking volumes about who was in control. Mark stared at me, his face pale, the superficial confidence completely evaporated. The stock, it's crashing. My firm has investments in Constellation. Corporate fraud on this scale, I said calmly, tends to have that effect. More phones around the lawn continued to buzz. People were moving away from Brenda and Mark, whispering, pointing. The Golden Children were suddenly radioactive, associated by family tie alone with the biggest tech scandal of the year, orchestrated by the cousin they'd just mocked. I felt a sense of profound, quiet satisfaction. Not just revenge, but vindication. Validation for every late night, every dismissed idea, every time I was told to focus on more practical things. My code, my hobby, had just exposed a lie built on greed and arrogance on a global stage. As the chaos and whispered questions swirled around Brenda and Mark, their faces etched with the dawning horror of their own indirect consequences, my phone chimed with an email notification. I opened it. The subject line alone made my breath catch slightly. Regarding Project Aegis inquiry from Dynasty Corp CEO. The email was brief, direct, from Sarah Martinez, CEO of one of the most respected names in tech. Ms. Thompson. It read, "Your authentication protocol's performance today was remarkable. Dynasty Corp is extremely interested in discussing Project Aegis's potential and your future. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience." I looked at Brenda and Mark, still glued to their phones, their faces mirroring the collapse of their carefully constructed world. Mark looked up, caught my eye, his earlier smugness replaced by a desperate, confused plea. "Guess programming," I said softly, but loud enough for them to hear, the echo of Mark's earlier words hanging in the air. Was exactly my thing after all. I offered Aunt Carol a small, grateful smile and began walking away from the patio, leaving the stunned silence and buzzing phones behind me. The air no longer felt stifling. It felt full of possibility. 1 month can change everything. I sat in the sleek, minimalist conference room at Dynasty Corp headquarters, watching Sarah Martinez conclude her presentation to her board. On the massive screen behind her, complex diagrams showed Aegis seamlessly protecting Dynasty Corp's global network, thwarting simulated attacks with an elegance and efficiency that felt almost sentient. In the 4 weeks since deployment, Sarah's voice was clear and commanding. Aegis has neutralized over 5,000 sophisticated cyber threats, adapted autonomously to 19 previously unknown attack vectors, and reduced our average security response time by over 90%. The board members, a collection of sharp, experienced individuals, looked visibly impressed. They had all seen the headlines about Constellation Tech's spectacular collapse, watched the congressional hearings on IP theft in the tech sector, and followed the criminal proceedings against Mr. Harrison. But seeing Aegis in action was different. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a revolution in security. "And you," one board member, a man with kind eyes, said, turning to me, "developed this largely on your own?" I nodded. "Yes. Nights, weekends, using my own equipment." Constellation Tech's involvement was limited to providing a testing environment under explicit, documented terms that preserved my intellectual property rights. The same testing environment that allowed me to perfect the authentication protocol that ultimately exposed Mr. Harrison's theft. Sarah smiled, turning back to the board. "I believe we are all in agreement. Shall we make the announcement?" The vote was unanimous. Dynasty Corp was acquiring exclusive, global rights to Project Aegis for $4.5 billion. And I was joining their executive team as Chief Technology Officer, tasked with overseeing Aegis's integration and future development across the company. My phone, now equipped with a professional handler for most inquiries, hadn't stopped buzzing for weeks. Tech journalists wanted interviews. Developers' rights organizations wanted me to speak at conferences. Congressional committees wanted my testimony on corporate IP protection. But the messages that resonated most deeply were from other developers. Hundreds of messages, sharing their own stories of stolen work, erased contributions, innovations claimed by managers or executives who couldn't write a single line of code. Aegis had become more than a security system. It had become a symbol, a rallying point for justice in an industry where creators were too often sidelined for credit takers. As I left Dynasty Corp that evening, stepping out into the cool Silicon Valley air, my phone rang. It was a number I recognized from the family reunion. "Mark." "Hello, Mark," I answered. His voice was strained, hesitant. "Scarlett. I need to ask you something." After the Constellation scandal broke, Mark's position had become precarious. His team, seeing his lack of technical understanding laid bare by the Aegis story, had begun to lose faith. The instability at Constellation and the broader market reaction had spooked clients. Mark admitted, hesitantly, that several of his key engineers were looking for new opportunities. "They're good people, Scarlett," he said. "Really talented. They don't feel like their work is valued here anymore." I thought of my conversation with David years ago, his insistence on protecting not just my own work, but fostering an environment where creators were respected. I thought of the hundreds of messages from developers feeling invisible. "Mark," I said, "send me their resumes. Dynasty Corp is building a new development team for Aegis's expansion. We need talented people who understand code and ethics. People whose work will be valued." Later that week, I visited the former Constellation Tech headquarters, now largely empty, facing bankruptcy and federal charges. Harrison had been indicted for fraud. The board had resigned in disgrace. The multi-billion-dollar government contract, built on lies, was cancelled. But in the parking lot, I saw a familiar face, Jimmy Chen, a junior developer from Constellation who'd always admired my work, quietly attending industry meetups I spoke at. "Ms. Thompson," he called out, a grin on his face. "Or should I say Chief Technology Officer?" I smiled. "Just Scarlett is fine, Jimmy. How are you doing?" "Actually amazing," he said, stepping forward. "After Aegis, after everything came out, we junior developers started talking. Connecting. We formed a coalition. Started documenting everything. Turns out Harrison had stolen code ideas from dozens of us. Small things, maybe, but they added up." He showed me his phone. A website. Developers from across the industry were sharing their stories, offering support, demanding recognition for their work. "We're calling it the Aegis Initiative," Jimmy said, his eyes bright with purpose. "A way to protect developers' rights and expose theft. Your story, it inspired us. It showed us we don't have to just accept it." I looked at the website, a powerful symbol of a paradigm shift. All those quiet innovators, finally finding their voice because one hidden creator's mark had revealed a fundamental truth. "Send me the link," I said. Dynasty Corp's new ethics board might be very interested in supporting this. My phone chimed again. Brenda. After the scandal, her firm had launched an internal review into connections to parties involved, especially anyone in practice areas related to corporate compliance or finance. She'd been asked to take a leave of absence pending the review. "I get it now," her text read. "Why you stayed in development instead of chasing titles. Real power isn't in taking credit. It's in creating something that matters. Something real." That evening, back in my own home, I opened my laptop, the same laptop I'd used to write the very first lines of code for Aegis years ago. On the screen, a console hummed quietly, showing Aegis operating flawlessly, a silent guardian protecting networks across the globe. But its real impact wasn't measured in the billions it was worth, or the attacks it prevented. Its impact was in the changes it had sparked. New industry standards being discussed for code attribution. Stronger protections for developers' rights gaining traction. A growing movement demanding respect for the people who actually build the technological world. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Chloe, my youngest cousin, the one who'd been quietly observing at the family reunion. "Starting coding classes next week," she wrote. "Think you could mentor me? I want to learn how to build something real." I smiled, a deep, contented smile. Real value. Real power. It wasn't in boardrooms or funding rounds or stolen credit. It was in the code. It was in creating. And it was in protecting what you built. Lesson 1, I replied, typing the message. Success isn't about who takes credit. It's about who does the work. And about protecting what you build. Outside my window, the lights of Silicon Valley twinkled. Tomorrow, I would start my new role as CTO. Next week, I would testify before Congress. Next month, the Aegis Initiative would hold its first major conference. But tonight, I opened a new project file on my laptop. Another idea. Another challenge. Another chance to build something real. And to prove, once again, that the developers they underestimate today might just be the ones revolutionizing the industry tomorrow. After all, every line of code tells a story. Mine had just changed everything.